Oh my god, this is why this is the best show on TV. How you going? Welcome to my The Expanse Season 1 Episode 9 Critical Mass Review. So this episode begins with Julie on the Scopuli. And Julie reveals that her father runs a research facility on Phoebe. So she's working with the OPA to intercept a ship that's on its way from Phoebe to Eros. So they believe it's just a transport ship manned by scientists who are transporting some sort of a bioweapon. But instead it turns out that it's actually a stealth ship that's manned by military personnel. So they're basically defenseless against this ship, and then they get boarded, and Julie's locked away as she's seen as somewhat of a complication, what with her father being connected with the organization. So while Julie's locked away in a locker on the Anubis, they destroy the Canterbury. And eventually Julie escapes from her locker and she finds that the ship's deserted. But she puts her hand in some glowing blue goo, and so now she's infected. And she cuts open the bulkhead to the reactor and she sees that the reactor is pulsing with this blue goo and like dead bodies and stuff. It's pretty freaky. So Julie messages Anderson Dawes, the leader of the OPA, to basically tell him that the mission was a failure. And she notifies him that she's going to abandon the ship on an asteroid and leave a beacon for the OPA to find. She also says that she has enough fuel in the escape pod to make it to Eros, so she asks that Anderson Dawes send someone there to help her. So in this opening scene, it seems that the crew of the Anubis were like already infected with this goo because they complain about how hot it is and they're coughing and things. And they say that, we should check to make sure that the air conditioning's on because it's getting so hot in here. So it seems like they're coming down with the blue goo fever. So Julie barely makes it to Eros and she's trying to get in contact with Anderson Dawes and she's getting no response from him at all. So she's lying in bed and she's getting sicker and sicker, and she starts like getting sensitivity to light or sensitivity to energy. So she starts smashing up the room and destroying all the electronics in it. And then she crawls into the shower and dies just before Miller and the crew of the Rocinante rock up. So the crew of the Rocinante explain to Miller that he needs to get out of there because the place is going to be crawling with police soon. And he's not going to be able to help anyone if he stays here. And if he wants to find out what happened to Julie, he should come with them. So they head out into the lobby and Semi's in there and he basically says to Miller, listen, lay low, I'll find out what's going on. Don't go anywhere until I've talked to you. So the Rocinante crew head outside and then some dudes in hazmat suits turn up and Semi says listen, this is my crime scene, you got to get out of here. And they say, listen, we run CPM, so you work for us now. So the crew of the Rocinante and Miller start arguing about who knows what and who had a hand in what when it comes to Julie's death. And Amos and Kamal basically just decide, listen, we need to get off this bloody asteroid. So they're going to go back to the ship and prep for takeoff. And then back on Earth, Avasarala's visiting Franck's house to pay her respects after he killed himself. But for some reason, she goes through his stuff and she grabs some pencils. I don't know why she's grabbing the pencils. I'm sure we'll find out later though. So back on Eros, and the guys in the hazmat suits go into Julie's room and they're extracting goo from her. And they say that it's not dangerous because it's not airborne. As long as it's not a liquid, it won't hurt you. So does that mean a solid's perfectly fine to handle? I don't know. So this guy is extracting fluids from Julie's body and he seems to be pleased with it. And he turns to his crewmate and he says, tell the rest of the guys to prepare the injections or whatever those are. So it turns out this guy, his name is Dresden. And he's the leader of these hazmat suit wearing guys. So he's calling Julie Mao's father to basically tell her that Julie's dead. But he also mentions that they have a viable sample of the proto-molecule, which must be the blue goo, I'm assuming. So it seems that Julie's father had a plan to somehow infect Eros. So I don't know if they had a sample of it on the Anubis and it got loose on the way to Eros, or if it was intentional to infect the crew of that ship. But he says something weird, which was, we can only learn by letting it learn. So is this proto-molecule like some sort of a living being? Does it have a brain? Interesting. So then Eros begins shaking, and an announcement is broadcast that basically says that a ship on the docks exploded and there's a radiation leak, and the entire asteroid is in lockdown. So people are informed that they need to get to shelters quickly and that all the ships are unable to leave. So back on Earth, Avasarala is checking these pencils for data vaults. Apparently you can stick a data vault in the back of a pencil now. So she goes through two of them and they're empty, and the third one has data in it. And it seems that Franck had plans for some gunship. I don't know if he had them legitimately or if he stole them, but apparently they were being built at the Bush Naval Yards. And Avasarala asks the computer to basically do a search for these ships, and the computer says that these ships cannot be located. So they seem to be pretty stealthy. So Miller says that the explosion on Eros must have been planned because the guards are just basic thugs, and the fact that they're organizing this evacuation means that they must have been drilled at some point by someone else. So Miller decides that he's going after Dresden, and Holden says, well, I'm going with you. And Holden says to Nagata that basically, if we're not back in 3 hours, you guys need to leave. So Nagata seems like she's all alone for a bit. So then we see the citizens of Eros crowding around these shelters, and on the way in, they're getting injected in the neck with a blue injection, I guess you'd call it. The guards are basically telling people that these injections are iodine to protect them from absorbing the radiation. But they totally look like the syringes that Dresden was using to extract the goo from Julie's corpse. They definitely look like they're filled with blue goo, or the proto-molecule as it's now known. So Miller and Holden are watching this, and Holden says to Miller that the guys that are with Dresden are wearing the same suits that the guys who boarded the Donninger were wearing. So Miller and Holden capture a guard and hold him hostage. I assume they want information from him. So we're on Tycho Station now, and Johnson wants to prepare a speech to alert people to the contents of the data vault that was on the Martian Marine Lopez's body. And Johnson says that if the UN ship, the Nathan Hale, is coming to capture him, then he wants everyone to know what data he has that proves that he didn't have anything to do with the destruction of the Donninger. So Avasarala checks it, and the design of the ship that attacked the Donninger matches the plans that Franck had from the Bush Naval Shipyards. So Johnson confirms that they were actually built on Earth and built by Earth. So why would Earth attack Mars? Interesting. So Miller's roughing up this guard that they've captured, and he notices that he has a tattoo on his neck, and he's like, that's a gang from Ceres. So he's like, what are you doing on Eros if you're from Ceres? And the guard says that CPM came and they basically offered big money to all the gang members on Ceres to come work, no questions asked, on Eros. And Miller says, like, what did they have you doing? And he says that it was basically technical stuff like setting up cameras and sensors around the station. So Miller and Holden decide that if CPM's trying to get these people into these shelters, then they want them out of there because there can't be anything good going on. So Nagata's back with Amos and Kamal, and they try to get in contact with Holden, but then all the comms in the station go down. And they see Semi trying to get people onto the transit system, but the guards won't let them. So a bit of a kerfuffle starts, and the guards start shooting. And then Miller and Holden use the shooting as a distraction to get into the vault that all the people were sent into. And while they're in there, they see that everyone's on the floor, like writhing in pain and sick. And they're like, what's going on here? And while they're there, this blue light comes down and like, and they're like, what the hell was that? Let's get out of here. So Holden says that he recognizes what happened, and it's that they just got blasted with a mega dose of radiation. And Miller says to Holden, like, how bad was it? And Holden basically says, we're dead. And that's the end of the episode. So I thought this was a really good episode, like one of my favorites. And I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I feel that this episode gave a lot of information out, like who Julie Mao was, what she was doing, who she was working with, who her alliances were with. It also showed who actually destroyed the Canterbury, so we know that now. It also gave more information about what the goo is and where it came from. I feel that Miller and Holden are two really strong characters who work well off each other, and I'm interested to see what happens to them in the future. I like this new faction that's been added involving Dresden and Julie's dad. I think it really adds a whole new aspect to the story. But I have one question, and that is how Avasarala knew to take Franck's pencils. So I'm assuming she would have known that pencils could hold data, but how did she know that she should get the pencils off Franck? Does she have suspicions about his suicide? Did she think that he's not the kind of guy who would kill himself, or is she just nosy? I'd also like to know more about the original plan of the crew of the Anubis. Like, why were they heading off to Eros, and what were they hoping to achieve? But other than that, I'm really looking forward to the 10th and final episode of Season 1. Now, I hope you enjoyed this review as much as I enjoyed watching the episode. Hopefully I'll see you again next week. You should totally comment. You should totally like. You should totally subscribe.